Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who have joined us today from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us on this inaugural Envisioning Beyond Digital Forum. My name is Vic Gupta. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Coforge. Coforge is a global systems and services provider. We specialize in engaging engineering with the emerging. And our core theme is to drive innovations and value to our clients with the industry and deep domain expertise that we have, along with the deep technical capabilities that we have. Today, as you may know, most organizations are already on the bandwagon of digital transformation. They're already doing either client engagements, creating new and differentiated experiences, exiting the data center, going into the cloud to leverage the speed and elasticity of it, or legacy modernization to really unlock the true value of the data in their systems of records, or simply put, cost optimization through automation. Well, if everybody is already doing digital and being digital, what's beyond digital? What are the future that holds for these organizations? How should they look at shaping their future? What are the disruptions that are coming in the marketplace? How should they be ready for it? What skill sets, mindset, and tool set they should employ to get ready for the future beyond digital? In this forum, I'll be talking to some of the leaders, some of the industry pundits, some of the CEOs, CIOs, CTOs who've been there, done that, and can offer their point of view to all of you in order to get ready for the Envisioning Beyond Digital. Today in the Coforge studios, I have Paul Upchurch, Global Managing Director of Baring Private Equity Asia. Thank you very much, Paul, for coming in.
Thank you, Vic.
Could you take a few words and a little bit discuss about yourself, Paul?
Sure. First of all, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much to yourself and Coforge for the invitation. It's a pleasure to meet everyone virtually today. As Vic mentioned, I'm with Baring Private Equity Asia. My experience is really over 30 years. I've been working in digital, doing asset repositioning with digital transformation and business transformation. I've been, in many, many roles over the years, but have seen it well over 70 companies inside of private equity and outside of private equity. I've been a PE operator in senior business roles before, so I've actually been in the field to do this many times. Prior life at Accenture as a partner doing big transformation, and currently and in the past, a second time was a PE owner. So I understand how you look at transformation in digital from a practitioner's perspective, from an owner's perspective, from an advisor's perspective. I think I've looked at this issue and this opportunity from lots of angles. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I would just say, as an opening, I couldn't think of a better time to be in digital than now. I truly believe that. I'm looking forward to the conversation today, Vic. And thank you again.
Thanks, Paul. Maybe to kick it off, I'll request, what does Envisioning Beyond Digital mean to you as a practitioner, as a leader for Baring?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I would say we're still working through that, but I think a lot of companies are still working through it. But if you think about the leaders and I would call them the alpha hunter companies, the ones that are really, and it doesn't matter if you're the biggest doesn't mean you're the best. I've worked with all size of companies in all different industries. So that's one of the fun parts of being in private equity. I get the eagle view. So I can speak broadly today with the time that we have. That really what I've never seen before is this fundamental point. I've never seen that there's a growing ways of working and customer experience expectation where governments, employers, and employees and the consumers have all aligned against this concept of digital and new experience. I've never seen it all happen that way. If you take a regulated industry, let's say in financial services, allowing you to do remote selling was not possible before because of regulations, just by way of example. So we'll talk about that more as we go through this, but that alignment of those different groups and the underpinning of that for how we work, which I think all of you understand, doing these remote meetings is the way, what I mean by ways of working. The ways of working have fundamentally changed. So that's one. And then the second is the customer experience. Underpinning that is the alignment of different groups of people and the mindset. So that is the big idea of what I think helps us think about how to capitalize on that opportunity and the fundamental change that will be with us going forward.
Thank you, Paul, for that. When organizations take a look at internally and externally, how should they prepare for, a world beyond digital? What are some of the key factors that you would call out as something that they should look at to really kind of enact their future and anticipate what the future could be or what could be the next thing?
Sure. And I'm starting to use a term, the new game. So if you're going to play, you have to play the old game well, but to play the new game and the old game, but especially the new game well, you really think about new operating models. So not just the technology, but how are you fundamentally going to change the way you run your business? Proprietary and customization. Proprietary and customization is so important. I'll talk about some examples later. Proprietary meaning proprietary assets and data, proprietary understanding of who your consumer is, proprietary understanding of your value chain. Very, very important. And working within your value chain to get proprietary partnerships. Operating with precision. So I would call that if you know the 4 P's of marketing, the fifth and the sixth, proprietary and precision are what are driving businesses today. And I see this across the same pattern recognition, industry, across industry sector with, if we're doing, let's say, an M&A tuck-in, you'll see an M&A tuck-in with precision on what? On AI, right? You'll see precision into the business model that you just can't compete against if you don't have it. So this is what I would call playing the new game is having the fifth and sixth P. So really understanding the business model and the business you're in, defining the pivot of what you want to do. This is often a pitfall for companies. They have an aspiration, but they don't know how to actually pivot from the old game to the new game. And then securing the right talent. So as much as we're talking about beyond digital, you still have to have adult supervision in the room. You still have to have people that really understand how to change businesses, change cultures. That's still very, very important recipe to this. And we'll talk more about that later.
Great. Would it be okay if you could give some examples of this?
Sure. Yeah, I think, you're seeing this more and more. I could give an example. It's not necessarily in the world of private equity, but just something that people might understand in general. If you think about Crocs, what they've done with Jibbitz in the customization of a very plain looking, ordinary thing like a shoe, and how they brought a lot of customization opportunity to that. Unlimited and unpacked customization driven by the consumer. It's that type of an example. There's so many others, and I'll talk about some in the world that we play, Vic, but there's so many others, but that's an easy one. If you could take an existing consumer product and really supercharge that existing consumer product. You also see this, if you've noticed, if you've gone to the grocery store and you see price pack architectures, because of the concerns in particular in the confections industry, you've seen smaller price pack architectures, customization of the product, same product, different recipe, same product, different price pack architecture. If you think about financial services, we're seeing the proprietary partnerships and integration of APIs are very important parts of the value chain now. So no longer is it good enough just to have customer service. If you're going to do a new customer experience, that's kind of becoming, okay, that's almost an expectation, even though I know a lot of you might be working on this hard right now. But it's taking, once you've done that, what's next? If you're asking me, like, what's the next thing? It's really starting to integrate your value chains and develop truly proprietary partnerships that will have enduring benefit to both organizations and to the marketplace. Platforms where you can customize if you're selling different financial instruments and you're in a brokering relationship, and I use this broadly, right? It could be in different financial service subsegments where they can have proprietary platforms that you work at. I think there's some experience that you've seen in your world. So those are the types of things that we see in a variety of industries, but the pattern is still there. It's proprietary, it's partnerships, fifth and sixth P.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack, Paul. But if I would say, we're pivoting beyond digital, what are kind of some of the keys to success that you would attribute to companies who have been there, done that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of companies doing transformation. I would still go back to some fundamentals. Make sure you understand what you mean by digital and digital transformation. Some people assign it to digital marketing. Some people truly believe it's a transformation of cost reduction and efficiency. We think about it in terms of the core back office, the core industry solution, and pivots into these new things. Pivots, for us sometimes mean pivots to digital growth, new platforms, new partnerships. That's where these innovations come. I think it's also really understanding, as I said, the business that you're in. You've got to really understand who the consumer is. If you really don't know your value chain, and if it's a complex value chain, which business to consumer, you've really got to unpack, look at your business model, and really get a proprietary understanding and figure out where the demand for the future is going to come from. I think really have a proprietary understanding of your demand and spending time on that and having commitment behind it before you invest in digital is very, very important. So I think a true proprietary understanding of your value chain and your consumer or whoever's your client or customer is very, very important. I think you've got to look at your innovation pipeline. Do you really have it? Is it a budget and a planning exercise that fits into your OGSM? Or is it truly a product roadmap where you're thinking broadly? I think both are important, by the way, as someone in private equity, both are important. But I think if you're really going to go beyond digital, you have to be spending some time on operating and changing. So you've got to have enough bandwidth for yourself and for your organization to operate and change simultaneously. And inside change, there's two parts of it. There's the change for the old game that you have to keep the existing business model. And there's the big change that you need to do. So it's really kind of three things that could be happening. For those of you that think in terms of project management, or if you're strategic planning, audience, that's really important that you really think about change on two levels. Yeah. Because if all you do, this is the other part of secrets to success. If all you do is operate in the core, in the old game, you'll never innovate. But if you only operate outside the core and you ignore what's in the core, that's not good either. Yeah. So today's business leader needs to be digital. They need to think about the old game and the new games probably simultaneously. I haven't found a lot of the companies that we own. I have not found anyone that's not worrying about both. In most of our companies, there's maybe a couple, but not many.
Yeah.
And talent. Talent is critically important key to success. So you've got to have, so what do we mean by talent? You've got to be able to attribute your talent to value. So where's the value in the company going to come from, and make sure you have the right talent placed on it. And as far as digital talent goes, it's not just digital talent. You need to unpack. And by the way, both managing the existing business model and pivoting to new, both are important. So if you're working on a big modernization project, let's say in financials, we care about that just as much. Protecting and future-proofing is equally important to an investment can have from an investor perspective, right? And from an owner perspective, modernizing and securing the core and future-proofing is just as important as, sometimes they use the word the shiny new object kind of project. Both are critically important. So if you're working on that or thinking about that, or you're working at the board level, both future-proofing, cyber, all those things are critically important to success, and having the right talent placed on both of those things is critically important.
Very good. Before we talk a little bit more on the talent side, Paul, let me just remind the viewers, in case you have any questions, do let us know in the comments field. Time permitting, we'll take a few questions, and hopefully Paul can answer those as well. Paul, you talked about talent quite a bit, and the Great Resignation I keep hearing in the media all the time. What's your take on talent, and what should organizations do to shape that talent, to shape the leadership, to shape the developer productivity, efficiency in the system? Where do you think there are gaps, and how do you think we should look at talent shaping in the future?
Sure. No, I think it's a fundamental question. You could easily have a discussion just on digital talent alone. But I think the first part, before you get into the actual practitioner level, and this is maybe above the actual athlete, the specialist, the excellent Olympians that are, on this call with us today, and those that manage them is leadership. So you've got to have the right mindset. You've got to have the right skill and will in the organization. Both are important. So when I look at a company and I work with companies, the first thing I look at is skill and will. So of those two, I look at will first. So are they willing participants for the change? If you don't have will, you have nothing. So you have to start with, before you get into the tech talk, before you can get into the transformation, you really have to look at the organization and say, okay, we've gone through the exercise of understanding the pivot. We know what we're committed in our industry sector, subsector to the change. Okay, so we set the pick for the new game. We think we have our playbook. I think in that playbook, it's important to know that you have the right team. And in order to have the right team, you have to have the right coaches and leaders to help you there. So I think you have to start with your leadership team to make sure there's the proper skill and will to carry and advocate and organize the team and the momentum behind it. Assuming you've gotten that far, then it's really getting into the specialists, like I said. And I think it's making sure that you've thought about your talent and the important part of how you serve the organization. Remember, I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we've never had this alignment. Mm-hmm. The ways of working. So if you're working on digital transformation, sometimes you're transforming IT for IT. Sometimes you're transforming internal operations. Sometimes you're doing the more beyond things with external entities. All those things need to be thought through, and you want to make sure those are rewarded and set up for success correctly. So the proper incentives, the proper rewards, and the proper visibility in the organization, proper funding for those programs so that they can be successful. So a lot of it is that. Then you also need to look at what kind of skill sets that are leading. What I can tell you from looking, project management skills, understanding AI and ML. Mm-hmm. If you're going to go to this new place of what I've seen, if you're going to go to this new place of, we want to do X as a service, most of the time, you're not able to do that exclusively with your existing team. You're going to need some fresh skills to help, modernize maybe some of the skills within the team and bring them forward. And it's a different pace. So it's usually higher volumes, more cloud-based, different software platforms, maybe even different skill sets that you might need. And so you need to really think about exactly what you want to do and set that up for success, by thinking about those different aspects of your plan, which is why you need to step back to the earlier comment of being very deliberate about what you want to do. Because once you move in and you get down to the talent level, if you've not thought that through, and I take this as a leader, that's the responsibility of the leader to have thought this through and set up the culture correctly. And then thinking about these newer age skill sets. But that's not to say we would not be valuing the existing legacy skill sets. You need to have institutional knowledge. Sure. So I think it's really a blending of the messaging and the program around the pivot from the old to the new and bringing the organization along with you. Yeah. Right. That's the goal.
Could you also comment a little bit on the internal versus the external? You talked about the old game that perhaps the internal team needs to play, and perhaps the new game that the external talent could be brought into that. Maybe a few words around that. What do you see from an internal and external side?
Yeah, I think internal teams can play old game and new game. An internal team would be, potentially if you're working in an internal support function, it's so important. The new game is making sure you future-proof the business, that the fundamentals are working, that you've modernized, and you understand what you mean by modernization. I've heard that term used quite a bit, but what do you really mean by modernization and code refactoring and shifting to the cloud? Those things are super, super important to a business these days. If you don't do it, let's put it this way, if you're thinking about it from an ExCo level, if you don't do these things to improve efficiency, reduce cost, and future-proof, and your competitor does, you're automatically going to be behind the eight ball. Yeah. So if a team wonders, I'm working on a modernization project, but I'm not doing the digital, I wouldn't be thinking like that. In fact, you should be rewarding. Those folks are future-proofing the future and the legacy of the business. I view those equally important, because if that is what I've watched happen in investments, if that's not done correctly, that could negatively affect an asset valuation. Sure. So even if it's outside of private equity, if you're just saying, in any industry, if a competitor is able, if put it a different way, right? If a competitor is able to operate more efficiently through digital in your sector or subsector, and you have waited and kicked the can down the road, that will create a competitive disadvantages, and that's where you get disrupted.
Sure.
And we've seen that happen, in a number of industries. So it's very, very important now more than ever. That's, I think we were joking a little bit before. There's never a better time to be in digital than now, whether you're working on future proofing or new skills. If you're working on the new skill or the new growth opportunities, it sounds fun, but it's also hard. It's hard work because you're going to the known unknown. You're going to have to make commitments to growth. You're going to be tied to growth more. So that's fun, but there's also a stretch in there for the resources to whether they're experienced or not.
Yeah.
And that's a great, I think that for me, pressure's a privilege, right? Pressure's a privilege, but both are important. Both have their pluses and minuses. So you shouldn't automatically upsell or downsell one or the other, because I view them as both as important. And there's challenges and opportunities. I would say mostly opportunities in both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot of great advice, insights, and foresights, Paul. Let me pause here for a minute, see if there are any questions that are available to us. And if there are, maybe you can answer a few
Sure,
of them.
I'm happy to do it.
So while there are no specific questions, I have a kind of a follow-on question, Paul.
Sure.
You talked about, I'm wondering if you could also give some few examples in real life that you have seen play out, in terms of what's beyond digital, that some of the companies you mentioned about Crocs as an example. Are there other examples that come to your mind that
Sure.
perhaps can galvanize the organizations?
Yeah. So I think, some of the organizations we've worked with, let's say in financial services, and I would also say in business services broadly. So if there's some in that sector, financial service, business services, what you're starting to see is this, first and foremost, the reduction in transaction processing times exponentially through automation.
Yeah,
that's almost table stakes now.
Yeah.
When I was working, a few years back, let's say 5-6 years ago, this was not as prevalent, but now it's very much table stakes to really reduce transaction sizes. Then these proprietary APIs where you can actually develop these and speed. Why are you doing these APIs? You're doing the APIs to speed up the transaction processing when you have a dependency, let's say a credit check or a KYC check or other ways where you need to integrate into the financial transaction process. That's become very popular right now. Understanding where you can have a proprietary understanding of your data or of your consumer. So this is where all the data science folks would play prominently, but truly understanding the data and converting that to outcomes. Not just having the interesting analytics, but it's got to be something that actually drives to outcomes. That's really where you have to aspire as a data scientist these days to get to the outcome level. But really having a proprietary view, especially in consumer-based businesses, and using that to help. I'm starting to work with a number of our portfolio companies now to get broad views of technology, like where are people getting certifications, for example. That's very helpful for me. I have to know that. Where are the certifications coming? What types of projects are people really interested in doing? Because I care deeply about the talent. So I would not get that by a survey. That's coming through deep data analysis and looking at the types of certifications, when they're coming, which markets around the world. You can't do that through a phone call and a survey. Yeah. So these deeper, richer, proprietary information assets would be another example of that.
A good segue, if I could take on that. Rishi Saxena, thank you, Rishi, for your question. He asks, how do you ensure customer loyalty in case of these fast-changing BI technology stack and establish trust for the long term?
It's a great question. I think this is why I'm literally working on this now on 2 or 3 companies. This is why playing the old game and new game is so important. If you have existing customer relationships, I'll use the word, that are kind of clumsy or clunky, and you have it and you have weak contracting. So some of this doesn't have to do with beyond digital. Some of this has to do with playing the old game well. So the first thing I always, and I'm literally talking to a few companies about this right now, We talk about it in terms of smart contracting. So how do you fundamentally, and asking the question with the appropriate levels in the digital team and outside the digital team, but those that own the relationships, do you have ownership of the relationships? Do you have the fundamentals right? Yes or no? If you start going to them, and I've had this happen more than once in my days of selling services back a long time ago. But if you go to them with Star Wars, when you can't get the basics right, I remember these arguments, right? So give me the so you really have to take and I would look at things like renewals, contract. You've got to use your commercial pivots as opportunities for your digital pivots. That's really, if I had to sum it up, that's your unlock. And through introduction, and this is why you've got to link your product roadmap into your commercial walk. So there's a series of walks. There's your commercial walk, which is tied to a financial walk, which has to be tied to a digital walk. And you've got to line those things up. And then many times they're not lined up. If they're not lined up, that's where you open it up. And if you're not staying ahead, and we'll go back to my initial comment, if you haven't thought about the business you're in and a pivot you want to make, and here you're doing your contract renewals, they're walking out the door, right? They're going to keep walking. And then your competitors are going to start chipping away at you. This is what happens. This is why it's such a good question. To combat that, you have several weapons at your disposal in a good way, right? You've got your contracts and your renewals and your product roadmap that you can embed that creates stickiness. You can incent clients into new products early with maybe better favorable pricing. You can close a competitive renewal by offering customization. But are you set up for that? Is your organization prepared for the demand coming on your renewals? Have you ever had that conversation? That's what we mean about playing the new game beyond digital and starting to think about these proprietary partnerships. They start to seep into your product roadmaps and your commercial walks and that integration. That's a starting point. Now, it could turn out, and what you want to watch out for, just as in the most basic level, watch out for your big clients. You've got to make sure you take care of your big clients, because if those are the drivers and they're starting to do price checks with your competition, and there's some competitor out there keeps coming up, you need to watch that.
Yeah. Right.
That's very important.
Paul, in the interest of time, and we have only a few more minutes,
Sure.
and I have a few other questions. Maybe I'll take one more question.
Sure.
This question is from Shri Sharma. He asked, what are the new techs in beyond digital? While he has other things, but I think the crux of the question is, what do you see shaping the industry in the tech sector itself? And you mentioned about, how important this is a great time to be in the tech sector, great time to be, doing digital transformation. But his question is primarily on the tech stack, perhaps, and what do you see in the future for the next 10 years, the next decade?
This is another I've begun to think about this. We're actually working on something now to actually predict disruption. So if I'm going to talk about, I said to myself, well, if I'm going to talk about beyond digital and the things, we're looking at the markers now of what digital disruption looks like in a business model to help us in investing. But if you ask me from an investment perspective, what I see in the next 10 years, I think it's going to be bionic companies. I think you're going to see bionic companies someday. I don't know which generation of graduates it's going to be from college. Someday I envision graduates graduating with their own bots. And their job interview is going to be based on having a bot that's better than someone else. I think it's going to be digi-human workforces. I don't think it's a complete replacement yet. I think we need to, as a society, I think we have to sort through that question, not for today. But I think you're going to see this integration of artificial intelligence. I'm seeing this now seeping into almost every business model. So artificial intelligence is going to expand into up and down the value chain, which I think in the beginning is going to create hyper efficiency, and it's going to become the norm. So as a business in business sectors and subsectors, I think over the next decade, you're going to start to see RPA for sure, but AI selectively placed through tuck-in acquisitions of these specialized hardware and software technologies that just do things that the average IT group could never do. That's going to super hypercharge transaction processing, insights, and so on, metadata about the transactions that you could just never get with an ERP system of today. You'd never be able to do that. So I think those are some digi-human businesses in general as an operating model. And I think the technology just happens. So as a user experience, it's less about I used to call this the boxes and sticks. When you go through and experience something, it's just so seamless. It's like walking. So those technologies that would be around you, lighting that's embedded, lighting that might be technology embedded into the walls, not just light fixture, that kind of thing where it's almost seamless.
Yeah.
So it'll be a variety of hardware and software technologies that would drive it.
Perfect. We're running out of time, as a matter of fact, Paul. Thank you very much for your insights and foresights into this. For all the viewers who still want to connect with us, feel free to send us questions. Our email address is information@coforge.com. I hope to hear from you. And for those who have already submitted the questions, we will get back to you in due course. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the week, and goodbye.